Hello and welcome to episode 61 of the DX Mentor, a discussion with Michael, VA3MW, about his ham radio journey in Flex Radio. Thank you for being with us. I'm Bill, AJB. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. We have a back catalog of almost 60 episodes covering many aspects of DX in both podcast and YouTube format. Please check us out. If you're new to DXing, I would really recommend episode 1 as it was recorded with several world-class DXers. You will get a feel of the excitement that goes with chasing DX. Remember, if you like what you find, please subscribe, like, and share. Another way to keep in touch and to see what we're up to is via the DX Mentor Facebook page. I will be posting about upcoming podcasts as well as other DX events, so please follow us. You can check the show notes for any of the information that we discussed today. And if you have another question, you can always contact me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. I have a few emails to share. The first is from Marcello, N2YHQ. Quote, Dear Bill, I'm a new listener of your podcast and I'm very pleased with the quality of all the episodes I was able to listen to. I wanted to say thank you for the fantastic episode on CW Ops, which I listened to 3 times as I did not want to miss a bit. This episode motivated me so much that I joined CW Academy, and after taking evaluation tests, I signed up for the intermediate level course. In preparation for the upcoming course, I'm practicing daily to remove some rust. Once again, thank you very much for the podcast and for promoting CW Ops. Very 73, and that's from Marcello, N2YHQ. Well, thank you for the kind words and good luck on your CW journey. I can tell you've already jumped past the biggest hurdle, and that is you got to do it every day. You have to practice every day, and if you commit to that, you will get it. So good luck, and please keep me in the loop. I also received this. Bill, just listening to one of your recent RIDI podcasts with W0YK, which was really interesting. I love hearing about modes that I haven't yet operated. With many of the tips I've heard on the podcast, I finally got my DXCC back in December from the ARL after waiting for it to clear the backlog. The count now is up to 121 confirmed countries and trying to rack up a bunch more at the top of this solar cycle. You have brushed on POTA a bit in the podcast, and I definitely recommend that you give activating a try. If you are running QRP, you don't want to call CQ and run, you can just hunt from inside the park boundaries, and with 10 contacts, you have activated the park. Recently, I was out at a POTA park that is about 20 miles from my QTH, which happens to be a reservoir that feeds the aqueduct that sends water down to Southern California. The noise level there was S1 or S2, and I had a lot of fun calling CQ and working sideband on various bands. I also spent some time spinning the dial and was able to work S01WS in Western Sahara on 12-meter sideband. With a 20-watt radio and a 17-foot telescoping wick, it was 5.9 both ways. It is understood that they were doing the heavy lifting, but it's still a thrill to have an almost 10,000-kilometer QSO and get a new country in my log from the park. Keep up the good work, 73, and that was from Aaron, N6ACA. Well, thanks, Aaron. And working SO1WS is no light issue, so congratulations on that. We did have K4SWL Thomas on with us to discuss POTA and SOTA activations back in episode 45. And I was really shocked at how many similarities there are between the two. So good luck to you, and keep me in the loop on your DX chase, and let me know if I can help. Our guests today are Michael, VA3MW, and Joe, WAGEX. Michael is an avid operator, a great ambassador for ham radio, and an enthusiastic promoter of Flex Radio. And of course, you probably know Joe, WAGEX. Joe's a great operator and a very, very solid DXpeditioner, and he always has a lot to add. So let's learn more about Michael and a little bit about SDR and Flex Radio. Well, good evening and welcome to the DX Mentor. We're very excited tonight to have a very special guest, somebody that I've admired and followed from a distance. I've actually met him a couple times. I think we even told hockey jokes one time, but it's Mike Walker, VA3MW from Flex Radio. And we want to talk about Michael as much as we want to talk about Flex. And before that, of course, as always, I have Joe, WAGEX. I recorded a podcast earlier without Joe, and it was like not having my right arm. So, Joe, I'm really glad you're back. Tell us about yourself.
Gee, that's a compliment. Well, thanks, Bill. Nice to meet Michael tonight. I've been a ham since for 55 years. Took off on 6 meters, like I've always said, and got hooked on DXing and been DXing ever since. Been on 62 D expedition, some very small, just me, and other ones were 15, 20 people. So I've always absolutely loved DXing. So, Michael, tell us something about you, buddy.
Well, I started, when ham radio was the social media thing in high school, living in a small town of North Bay, which is a 4-hour drive north of Toronto in those days. And just, I don't know, there was the draw of radio. Radio just always has been everything. And I remember days of doing demonstrations. The store was towers. It was a chain store, and sitting there in the lobby making contacts, and without my license, it was a hosted station, and went and just did it. And
Sure.
Joe, you brought up 6 meters. Some of my first 6 meter contacts were with a Motorola prog line on 52525 on FM. And the first time I heard the band open, and I was like, my ham shack was in a crawl space, which was both good and bad. But how I got a prog line in the crawl space and a Model 15 teletype, I still don't remember how I got it, like 25 feet in and up on a bench by myself. Because anyway, but I remember living in North Bay, and six opened, and it was long before the grid square world. And I just had a vertical stuck on the eaves trough. It was a cut down CB whip and some coax, and I don't know what I used for a power supply to power these things, because Astron didn't exist then, or we couldn't afford it, but glued together something, or somebody gave me something. And here I am working these guys in New York City like they were next door, right? And maybe that was, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to do this, and even today, pretty close to 50 years later, we still learn stuff about RF and experience stuff. And it's the hobby just keeps giving that way.
Yeah.
So in your role with Flex, you get to see the new stuff and the old stuff. But before we get there, how did you get into ham radio? And I get a hint that you're a little more of a DXer maybe than kind of the other group you hang around with on Ham Radio Workbench. So how did you get there?
Yeah, I usually change the P for an O. I'm a more QRO guy. I'm the guy
Okay.
wearing the shirt that life is too short for QRP, but that's okay. I wish I had half of Thomas's CW skills, although I'm working on that. And I'd at least like to get up to a solid 20. And but I just got into it, and because I'm very inquisitive, even to this day. I've turned 66 next month, yet I still crack open a manual, and my VCR never flashed 12 o'clock type of thing. And and part of that, I think, too, over the years, I've been really fortunate in technology as well, where ham operation, or the hobby, got me probably 8 of 9 career jobs. The first one being, I took avionics in college, aircraft electronics, always fascinated by flight too. Could have gone either way. And but IBM hired me back in 1977 to be a technician on a computer in NORAD. And you guys can Google it, the ANFSQ7, that's Alpha November, which I slash Fox Sierra Quebec 7. It had, I forgot, 64,000 tubes in it. It had core memory,
Wow.
which I have a piece sitting over here, and that I managed to get a couple of pieces of before I left. And one computer was about the size of, maybe bigger than a hockey rink, and we had 2 of them, and they were 600 feet underground. I do remember that the memory tubes were 6146s. Now, you remember back then, we all had 6146 tubes in our finals.
Yeah.
These were W's, but it didn't care. So we pulled them out of memory, when they were like 85% efficient, which is good enough for us, right? So
Yeah.
at one point, when I remember leaving North Bay in 82, and I took a box full of 6146s with me, and we're selling them up here for like $25 each or something.
Wow.
And they were considered garbage. And but to be honest, that ability to walk inside a computer and diagnose problems and open up a schematic and pages of schematics. And you can see my hands like they were like road maps. You'd pull it up, and then 8 pages later, we had a table. And so you'd follow a pulse all the way through it. And it went, oh, continued on and get another book. And this frame or the computer you've probably seen on TV if you're an old fart like us. It was either in the parts of it were in the time tunnel.
Yeah.
Voyage to the bottom of the sea, although that thing seemed to catch on fire a lot, if you remember. And yet they'd rebuild it within an hour and a half. And a variety of other movies. Towering Inferno was the big control system in Towering Inferno, and a whole bunch of others. And if you ever get a chance to go to the museum in south of San Francisco, go see some of the computer museum. You'll see pieces of it in there, very small, a little bit of it. But yeah, I think that's what, so if you get involved with me and I'm saying, well, does it do this or do that or do this? I was taught to diagnose, what do we know and what don't we know in a problem? Sure. And they all are part of, we know a symptom, but they're all part of the root cause. And that's why maybe I should teach that, because that's something I'm really passionate about. Right.
I think it's a lost skill too, really, right? Really understanding a system and debugging it is.
I think you're right, and I hope not.
So I imagine before a big contest weekend, you guys had a lot of memory failures and you had to swap out 6146s.
Oh, I never really started contesting until I think until the solid state area. My first contest radio was a TS 140, and that was replaced by a TS 690. And we changed the filters in that, and wow. From those Murata little tiny filters, we figured out a way to glue in the big expensive Kenwood ones, and it made a huge difference, of course, to the front end.
So when you tell, and I hate to use this term now, but we're about the same age, when you tell these younger folks about these computers, their eyes just gloss over. I've got two guys that work for me that are both under 25, and I took in a wire wrap board that I have that still works. It's a 6303 Hitachi microprocessor with like 16K of wire wrap memory. And they look at that and I say, yeah, we used to have to go through, we would have to cut bytes out of the program to make sure, and they just scratch their head like, how could you do that? And it's like, well, that's what we did. I mean,
yeah. That's all you do.
Or wiring a plug panel on a card reader.
Oh yeah. And the first question isn't always how, it's why. Why would you have to do that, right? So you're involved in all that. How'd you make the jump to ham radio?
I did ham radio before. Ham radio got me this job. It turned out that about half of the club worked for IBM for NORAD, and there was I guess 20 of us that worked 7x24 to keep this computer running, or these two computers. So you'd always been doing maintenance on one, and I'll describe that because that's really interesting. And then the other one would be active systems, and then you would switch over from A to, they had really unique names, A and B. And but MIT, so you'd think if you were to put 64,000 light bulbs on a rack and turn them on, you'd figure out that one's going to burn out right away. So how do you protect that? And so the computer was designed in 1958 or 59, and if I remember the story correctly, MIT students designed the marginal checking system. And what we could do, there were actually programs, believe it or not, big card deck programs that would vary the screen voltages up and down off of whatever normal was. And they learned that if they went so far one way, you still should be able to run your test program, and the other way. So if you varied it, X percent or whatever, 20%, and it still worked great. But if it started to fail, you had to solve it. So you could do predictive diagnosis on a tube system. And the marginal checking system was phenomenal. Now thinking back of the design and the work, and long before things like PLCs or the smarts we have, even 30 years ago. So this is job one that's got me into IBM, thanks to I played here I am, a 17-year-old or 18, 19, I guess. I looked like Canadians would know what I mean, like Farley Mowat. I had hair coming down to here, and I had to show up. Like IBM came to the campus and interviewed us, and I was warned, put a suit and tie on, and I did, and played the game because you had to, and maybe you still do today a little bit, and had a reasonably good interview, and it just went from there. I spent 10 years at IBM.
Wow. Wow. Good for you. So you've got your ham ticket, but then what about this DX bug? I mean, Joe was twiddling it on 6 meters. He got caught. Ironically, I happened to work at my first, I guess I was 11. I worked at Canadian outside of Toronto. And even though I had worked the West Coast and everything else, I thought I'd worked, Borneo because I was so excited about another country. And so what about you?
So the first radio was a DX40 and an HR10B that somebody gave me. And I've learned that lesson today. I give away stuff here in Toronto. I really just posted on the, what we call KWARC. And I'll say the first person that calls me or sends me a shipping tag, it's yours. Right. Or you can drive by, it's at the side of the house. I give away a ton of antennas. And so that was a lesson I learned from my early days. And I'm going to tell all you old farts out there, if you're trying to get $50 for it, give it away. Just, it's not going anywhere. And if you can get a new ham, give them everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I've had great success with that. So HR40, DX10, DX40 HR10B, it's what, 40 watts on AM, but I could only operate CW. And we started at 10 words a minute. And that was all given to me. And I had an 8-meter dipole, and I just worked people in Ontario. And then I splurged and I was a vertical multi-band antenna, and I remember sticking it in the backyard, and I worked Japan.
Bingo.
And I still remember, I should look at my logbook because I still have my paper logbook sitting. You're going to make me go look. And I think Japan was one of the first, really cool DX. But I didn't start contesting probably till 91, other than Field Day, which is, it's a different sort of contest, right? And I can thank my close buddy and, longtime lifetime friend, Ken, VA3 Sugar Kilo, who was living in Northern Ontario, and Tim said, come on up here. We'll do, my first contacts was CQ Worldwide Sideband, which, as you know, is probably one of the toughest contests going. And we did okay. And we just, when you could sit in the chair for 37 hours straight.
I just worked your buddy Ken not too long ago.
Did you?
On 6?
Yeah.
For FN06?
Yep. I don't have the zip code, but it was on 6 meters.
Yeah, you would. He's a big popular guy in FN06, so he does. He does a lot of FT. He does a lot of scatter as well.
Yeah, I worked him January the 5th. Yeah.
So he does a lot of 2-meter stuff too, and he's an incredibly quiet place, so he can hear a mosquito fart, as we say. He's got a zero noise floor. He's out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, we had George on, and he was talking about. Well, I guess we were all talking about DX or whatever, and I chastised him a little bit. I said, I do not want to get on the air and hear you guys on that trivia competition again and lose that DX column, because I think whoever you guys were playing against on Ham Radio Workbench ran the DX column, and I was like, no, come on, I'm in the car. No, George, come on, you know better than that. So we got to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's all.
Speaking of George, you see the glow over here on the wall.
I do.
New station controller stuff. I do a lot of all my stuff's remote operating. That's my test panel for his station controller that controls all the stuff behind me.
Wow. That really sounds exciting, and if anyone's not sure what that is, they need to tune into Ham Radio Workbench, because it sounds like a great product. And I like him because he's so humble, and he's so he's like the perfect host. He just does a terrific job.
He's so creative as well. Anyway, go to pactena.com and you can learn about it.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes too. So we're doing all this work, and all of a sudden you find yourself with the option to go work for an amateur radio products company. Was Flex the first one?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I ended up just helping a local store called, back in 1991, was just before when they hired me, but a couple of months before, a local ham radio store, like you support all your local ham radio stores. And then it was called Atlantic Ham Radio, and it was here in Toronto. And he said, hey, I need some help for the Ham Fest. Would you like to come and stand behind the counter and help? And I did. I had a great time talking to people and selling people stuff. And then the owner, his name was Lutzecker. He's a German gentleman. He's a you know, if you've never run a small business, you don't understand the pressures that are involved with running a small business. You know, if you know, when you have to either make payroll or make taxes or insurance or rent or all these things, every penny counts. Even today, you know, whether it's DX engineering, whether it's main trading, whether it's anybody, every little penny counts. So we just sort of worked it out, and I learned a ton from this guy. Man, he was so thrifty, but all in a good way. And this was in the '90s, and we had good product, and um, it's great customer training too when you have to stand behind a counter. IBM was really good at soft skills, but you know, I don't know if you have any kids that have ever worked at McDonald's. They're really good at teaching that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
so that's I spent 7 or 8 years there. Went back into the IT world, and I was a escalation manager in the software backup recovery business, including having to deal with 9/11 and having to get from Toronto to New Jersey on September the 12th and cross the border.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, gee.
That's and But eventually, you know, you get older and that wears out, and you get tired of it. And then, sort of the same thing happened with Flex Radio. Flex Radio was here in Toronto. I loved the product as a person. I had the 3000, a 5000, a 1500. I learned when the 6000 series came out, and I met, you know, I'd go see them at the booth like we do. We have they're wonderful people. They're phenomenal people. They know your name, whether that's good or bad. You know, we know your name.
Yeah.
And they came to Toronto. I said, "Hey, can I meet up with you?" And we met them at now Radio World, and I decided, I checked. It said, "You need some help in the booth tomorrow." Same story sound familiar?
Yeah.
And so I helped them out in the booth, and that was in, I guess, April of 17, I guess 2017. And a couple of months later, Matt Youngblood, who was in charge of sales, sends me an email. He said, "Would you like to join our team?" And it just sort of happened. And, you know, by the time you get to my age, it's like, okay, I'm tired of being a director of a software company. Let me go back to being the individual contributor. You know, I go home at 5, I don't care. And we even joke about that today, because Lori Hicks, who I report for, I joke with her going, "You know what? I'm glad I'm not a director or VP anymore. Bye." If we all take it in good stride, right?
Yeah. So I have to go back a step, and being
sure, please.
I've been in IT since '83, I guess. Were you in the IT world during Y2K? You know, I've
Absolutely.
talked to people about Y2K and that whole midnight transition, and I was a GE aircraft in their support area, and everybody thought planes were going to fall from the sky, and their bank accounts would be empty, and so you had to go through that also.
Yeah, because we were in a recovery business, so yeah, we staffed, and I was there. We had a nice party. You know, everybody, as you know, everybody had tested up the yin yang, and but you know, I think that was probably the start of you know, the media really driving things, you know, worse than it needs to be, you know. And
yeah, we kind of always laughed after the fact, because we shut every server down, and you can imagine this giant server farm at aircraft, and we had more units fail because they hadn't been shut off in years, and now these spinning disks aren't coming back up because the lubricant has, you know, cooled, and now the thing's, you know, not spinning, what I want to say, on center. And the discs were, so we had a couple, I mean, not a lot, but we had a couple fail where, had we left it running, they wouldn't have failed. So anyway, I just, when I see IT guys that were in the business back then, I have to ask. So
it's given that spinning media my brain's full of a lot of useless crap. So this is one of them. You know, that spinning media, like the hard drives we use every day, generally have a shelf life of about 3 years. And then, for those of you that listen to Steve Gibson, for I forgot the name of his podcast, Security Now, you know, you've long learned that they go into a self-repair mode, and you can't tell.
Yes.
And that's why they get slower, because they're always moving bytes of data around from bad area to good areas.
And yet I know there's a lot of people running critical systems on spinning disks somewhere. And I mean, heck, we see stuff in the paper here in the Dayton area for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base looking for COBOL and Snowball programmers to maintain old systems. And it's like, oh, that was old when I got into this, you know? So
I'm going to go back to NORAD since you brought up discs. We had drums that spun. And so they had a head across. It was like 33 heads across. And they were, because it was 32-bit words and a 1-bit parity.
oh my
And
God.
we would have to tune those by using an oscilloscope and big Allen key with a wrench on it in your ear. And you'd stick your ear up to the tool and you'd crank the tool down until the head crashed, literally, because you could hear it. You'd have a scope hooked up to it because you wrote all ones, and then you'd back it off to 70%, you know, and it was the classic big Tektronix telescope with a special plug-in module to tune drums.
Wow.
You're going to get emails on that because I know other people had to do it for a living.
Yeah, I can remember HP had, we used to call it the washing machine because it was like it was a 300 meg device, but it had these big disk packs you put in, and it was the size of a wash, and we sold those like hotcakes. So,
oh yeah, like the IBM 3350s.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So we digress. We're getting off topic.
We digress.
Joe's about to fall asleep. So
No, this is good. I don't know anything about it, but it's good.
So I will, and I hope you'll touch on this a little bit later. But the one thing that's impressed me most about Flex is as I was coming up the learning curve, I had what I have to admit, looking back, were probably a couple of very simple questions, and then a couple that weren't, and they were answered like immediately. You put them out on in the help forum, and boom, you get multiple answers back, and none of them were like, "Oh, what a stupid question that was." You know, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, several people run into this, and here's what you." And while you're looking at that, make sure you pay attention to this. So we'll touch on that later. But when I think of Flex, that's been a great experience, I have to say.
Perfect.
So now you get on with Flex, and I assume it's more than booth duty.
It was all essentially, it was an inside sales job. It wasn't easy.
No.
You know, it's you're on the phone all day, you're wearing a headset, the phone rings. Yes, we do answer the phones. I know some people don't think we do, but the good news is the phone rings. And sometimes it's good news and sometimes it's bad news. And conversations with hams are never short. Guaranteed any call, 20 minutes. And that's a short one. And there's like 1.5 of us or 2 of us. Andy, VA3CW, and I do it today. And but some phenomenally interesting phone calls. I've talked to 2 NASA mission controllers who are hams who worked on Apollo.
Really?
And one of them, I won't mention his name, was kind enough to spend an hour and a half, and I don't really care how long he took, describing Apollo 13 from his view.
Oh my gosh.
And how I figured this out is you'd call and I'd say, Joe would call in, we're talking, hey Joe, what's your call? WHEX. And while we're talking, I'll go look on QRZ.
Sure.
And see what you're into. And sometimes, you know, and I would have found out he's a 6-meter operator, and I would have maybe, you know, he's a big digital 6-meter operator. And then, you know, that just opens the door and it's easy after that. But,
yeah.
And, you know, so that's, you know, first 2.5 years, that's, you know, what I was doing. So, and then that morphed into my years into dealing with customers and customer support. And at Legato, our software company, we learned, we were really good at trying new stuff. And if you've ever worked in support, we got into something called knowledge-based support. And let me digress for a minute, because this is really important. We all think support is you call some specialist, answers the phone, we give you the answer, which is, you know, exactly what you went through, Bill. But we had dispatchers that would take the call if somebody would call you back. We had built a knowledge-based support where we, you know, it's like, let's just say the SD card problem, because that problem's long gone, but something very common or severity 1-ish, we would write it all up. And they would we would teach them to capture certain keywords, and with the right software, and it would be so easy in AI today, would say, yeah, you know what, this looks like this problem. Here's our bug number. Can you go look at it in our portal? There's a fix for it. Can you give that a shot? And then our guy will call you back. It might take a day because they're a little busy. And 80% of the time, our call takers were solving problems. They had no idea what you know, the core part, but this is what knowledge-based support was. So when I came to Flex Radio, part of the things I would see is we were sort of doing things the classic way. And I'm going to get yelled at for saying the old-fashioned way, but the classic way. And I thought, you know, I can help by doing a video. So I did 1, and then I did 2. And then, you know, there's a little friction in there. That's not your job. But looking back over how many years? 7 since I started around 2017, 8 years, we have managed to grow the business, to probably 15,000 radios out there. And yet we still only have like 2 to 2.5 support people
Oh,
without
wow.
having to take, and support is not a money making part of the venture of the business, right?
Right.
So who pays for support? Well, you do when you buy your radio. If you
Yeah.
have to buy another head or build another head, it drives the price of the radios up. So anyway, and it just worked into being the face and a Flex radio. And I think one year at Dayton, I was there, and at the last minute, one of our guest speakers couldn't make it or was sick, and I did the first talk about remote operating, which I was really passionate about, and one thing led to another.
So off you go.
So off
So
I go.
so what are you doing now with Flex?
Pretty much
Oh,
the same thing.
okay.
I do inside sales, all the shows with Andy, VA3MW, and Lori Hicks, and plus whatever cast of thousands we need. So there's a fair bit of travel, a lot of weekends that we give up. I do a lot of I sort of inherited the social media part. So the Facebook part, which is entertaining on good days. And you get to realize um, that not all the people there are Flex owners, or they're just there to be
Boy.
insert acronym disturber.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we know who you are, so it's sort of funny, right? Sometimes we sit on it, and sometimes, yeah, you can get my goat a little bit and like walk away from the keyboard. And some days I want to blow the whole Facebook group away, but it is sad to say, or not sad to say, it's quite a revenue generator, Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah.
With
Yeah.
I don't know how many members, it was like over 9,000 in that group alone.
Wow.
Gee.
And we try to be honest. We try to let people vent and be honest and say their thing. And every once in a while I delete something because it's just not, polite.
Yeah.
And
So
and so
how's your service dealing with Flex? Good service, excellent service.
our hardware service,
Yes, sir.
they're good. We've got a couple of 3 great guys. I think we're pretty much up to speed. I don't talk to them every day. It's a whole different part of the company. Um, the the big thing you want to say, what does anybody want when they have a problem? They want their problem fixed, whatever that is. And it doesn't matter what the industry is, right? I want my cell phone to work. I want my radio to work. The worst thing we deal with is not a great, or the radio comes in and we can't recreate the problem. If you can't recreate it, you can't fix it.
Yeah.
Right. And but they are really tenacious about trying to recreate a problem. They'll phone or email and say, can you send me a video, or tell me how to recreate it, or tell me about your antenna system? Because it's really easy to assume, this is from my debugging days. So we have a symptom, right? Like, maybe you have a cough. That's the symptom. Doesn't mean what the root cause is.
Right.
I walk with a limp. Well, did I break my ankle? No, I should take the tack out of the bottom of my foot. That's the root cause.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And there's a huge difference. They're really good at trying to get to the root cause. So when they fix something or send it back, I know that they make sure it's done. Sometimes stuff goes through within a week. Sometimes a lot longer, because there's a fixed number of staff. And it's not always the same number of radios coming in every week or day. Mid-July, you have 2 things to deal with. You have a lot of EMP events, either lightning or nearby lightning. You still have wind static and snow static and things to deal with, but they tend to happen more, the worst ones, in the summertime. And then you also have people on vacation. So it's a bit of a perfect storm. So things go longer in the summertime, right? So,
Yeah.
but nobody's part-time. They're all full-time employees.
Wow.
And they're all in Austin, in Germany.
So about this time last year, I think it was, Flex rolled out their 8,000 series. Is that right? About this time last year? Can you give us some details on that?
Sure. The 6,000 series came out, well, not the 6,000, but the 6,400, 6,600 series came out about 2018, just as I've started here. And that's run its course. And the core part of the problem, the root cause of why we came up with the 8000 is it gets harder to get parts. Those really smart people that make those really cool chips, uh, want to make new stuff. It's either cheaper, faster, smaller, all the above. And why make the old ones? And that's good for the technology, but it's maybe bad for you if you like to get 10 or 20 years out of, and maybe you will, right? It just means at some point in time you can't get the parts. But ask me about long-term service in a minute.
Okay.
And so we came up with the 8000, the 8400, and the 8600. And if I slip and say 8800, it's just a Freudian slip. There is no 8800. There's nothing on the table. I just seem to do it once in a while. And that was to replace those two units. And under the covers, simply, you got a faster processor. It's a Linux processor it's running, and a faster field programmable gate array. That's the stuff that does all the really hard math, that gives you that waterfall, that pan adapter. And I know, Bill, you use the radio and you watch that waterfall and that pan adapter on a computer or an iPhone or a Maestro. And what that is really nothing more than a glorified movie. We build that image in the radio and we just send, like a stack of JPEGs. It's, to the radio. It's not quite like that, but I'm trying to make it simple. And this is why you're able to use your radio with full resolution on the waterfall and the pan adapter on an iPhone. It's not a lot of, there's a lot of horsepower in an iPhone, but it's not like your desktop. And this also is the ability to zoom in. Imagine you've taken and zoomed in, to the waterfall down to a resolution of 4 hertz per pixel.
Wow.
Which are 4 hertz per pixel. And I don't know a better way to describe it, but that's like really small piece of radio information.
Yeah.
So that's one of the core parts. Then we put a GPS on each radio, or a GNSS, that comes with the radio, and that allows you now to use that as your time standard on your home network, an NTP server. But more importantly, it keeps the radio on frequency. So you don't have to buy a crystal oscillator. Remember, we all bought heated crystal oscillators. You don't have to install the GPS DO on the radio, and you get your accuracy down to about half a hertz at 50 megahertz, which is pretty darn accurate, right? Far more than we ever need. Very important for those of us. I also do microwave. When you start multiplying, you want that accuracy. And you can still add the classic GPS DO in the radio. You have to do it when you order the radio. It has to be factory installed now. And you do that for more, like 3 orders of magnitude better accuracy. And people tend to do that if they want to use 10 megahertz as a frequency reference for maybe your test equipment, if you have other test equipment. So those are 2 of the bigger things. The other thing is we're running along the lines of ARRL's Clean Signal Initiative, CSI. We've included, or we will be including, adaptive predistortion, which is called Smart Signal, and to clean our transmitted signal up. Now, flex radio transmitters are really clean anyway, but they go to super clean. And I'm actually sitting here watching my Maestro on 80 meters, and I see some really, if you look at a waterfall, clean signal is a nice, beautiful tower.
Oh.
And then you see some other ones that look like the tower's falling down.
Yeah.
It's like where everything's turned up to 11, or they don't know what the ALC meter's about in their radio and stuff. So those are some of the major features that are coming with the radios. Some other, sure, it's vaporware. We haven't designed it yet, but other features coming down the road. But more importantly, we ran out of not necessarily space, but horsepower in the 6000 series. We just couldn't do any more, leave enough computer, the build term, headroom, and, not have like the screen skip or the audio go clippy or something. And so we've locked that down, and we just needed more horsepower. And that's to be given, it's normal. It's part of, I guess, Moore's law today. And we've all gotten faster computers, and it's it's quieter. You can hear the difference. The radio is quieter than a 6000 series.
Okay.
So different architecture, but the same idea.
So there's a number of terms that I thought I've either read or heard, or I saw you present. And let's start very simply.
Yeah, please.
Spectral capture unit. That to me is, if I understand things, that's the heart of this whole thing.
You know, I tell people that think of your eyeballs, that's your spectral capture unit. If you were Geordi on Star Trek, that was his glasses. This is the part the antenna connects to. And it's the A to D converter, analog to digital converter. It's the part that takes the analog radio signal from the antenna and turns it into numbers so we can then work with it and do all the math, the noise cancellation, decode sideband, etc. So that's what the SCU does. Ours is really special. I'm sure many of your listeners have played with RTL dongles or little small boxes of for the SDR, which is like a band-aid term. The Flex radio decodes or captures or digitizes, whatever term you like to use. And I want you to think about this. Listen to what I say, because it's pretty vast. From 30 kilohertz all the way to 54 megahertz, 100% of the time.
Wow.
So the entire HF spectrum is in numbers. And for the bit heads, that's at 16 bits. That's not a small number. So this all gets generated into a stream of numbers. In a little network in the radio that pukes data to the next stage, the field programmable gate array, at over 3 gigabits, which is 3,100 megabit networks.
Wow.
In your house.
Yeah.
So, and I used to say it was running at about the speed of about over 300 Raspberry Pis, but now multiply that by 4.
Wow.
There's a lot of horsepower on the radio. So that's phrase one. What's your next one?
Well, I don't want to go down this road right now because I'm sure we could go all night, but I wouldn't consider myself a great troubleshooter, but in the work I've done with old receivers, there were different places you could take the scope and you could watch the signal. And so you can't do that because it's all numbers.
Yep.
I never
You know the advantage of that? So you probably have a basic understanding or maybe a very good understanding about the automatic gain control in a super heterodyne radio. So that if you don't know what that does, if you have the ability on your whatever radio you have, turn it off and go try to listen to a sideband QSO, and your hand's going to be on the volume. Now, Bill probably learned, because he's been a ham a while, that you were probably taught at some point in time to turn the volume to full, turn the automatic gain control off, and use the RF gain as a volume control.
Correct.
And we all did that, right? FT8's a great example of this. So the superhet, hopefully you can visualize this. So the automatic gain control on the radio, all it does is it's an incredibly simple circuit, but the less noise there is, which means it's a quieter signal, means we need less gain in the front of the radio. That's what it does. It's sort of like a backwards thing. But, you have lots of noise and we turn the gain up. We have little noise, like a nice sideband, so we turn the gain down. But we do that on the superhet radios in the front end to everything coming in. Okay, well, that works okay, but if we're doing an FT8's a great example. I used to use RTTY as an example. So now you're on an FT8 operator, you copy this guy, and he's like plus 17, because we all have these little signal to noise ratio flags, right? If you want to see if your radio is doing a good job, see how weak a signal you can copy right beside that plus 17, like within 100 hertz or 200 hertz. And on an analog radio, you'll see that it sort of mushes and there's not that much dynamic range. The range between the weakest signal you copy and the strongest in the same 15-second cycle. And that'll give you an idea of performance. I clued into it in our TTY contest one day, but then I started looking in FT8, and I'm going to describe it this way. This is not the way it works, but it's sort of like every little bit has its own automatic gain control. So I have seen, plus 17 dB strong, huge long signals, and then 50 hertz away, like a minus 21, and decoded it.
Wow.
And this is what, if they talk about dynamic range, this is one of those things that's incredibly important in a receiver. And this is what makes a good receiver really good over a not so good receiver.
Wow. Very impressive. Yeah, I've never thought about that, because that's a whole different paradigm under the cover.
And this is also why we're going to direct sampling.
Yeah.
Have you heard that? Do you want me to talk about why direct sampling is so important?
Yeah.
So in a flex radio, we have the spectral capture unit, and it drops right in, and we decode it. That's direct sampling. 7610 does direct, ICOM 7610 does direct sampling, as an example. It does it very well. The other way, or the 100-year-old way we used to use HF radios, is super heterodyne, right? So we would mix two signals, and then we'd have an intermediate frequency. Well, heck, some radios, remember the ICOM 735, I think had 4 IFs. It was quad conversion. And while that helped get rid of some problems, it created others. And the others were that when you remember what happens when you have two frequencies and you mix them?
Right.
You get the
the
sum
products, right?
and the difference,
Right.
plus the two originals. And you only want one.
Right.
Okay. And so what made the difference between a okay super heterodyne and a 10 times the price super heterodyne is how well you cleaned up that mixing. That was one of the major things. When we mix, CW is a great example. All these signals, no matter what, like say a CW contest, you get this smearing going on. That doesn't happen in a direct sampling radio because there's no mixers. And this is why we want to go and do it this way. And you still will get smearing in a hybrid, SDR HF radio. And I find it quite interesting when it was explained to me that when we bench test, and that's a finger quote, whether it's you or ARRL or anybody, and this is not throwing anybody under the bus, it's just the math we've gone to, we come up with this, reciprocal mixing number that anything over 100 dB is amazing. So that's just on a bench. But when you take and hook it up to the real world, all bets are off, because you've got so many mixing products in the mixing products, and that's why we end up with roofing filters and double conversion and triple conversion and quad conversion, hopefully trying to, get rid of this lot and this lot. And so direct sampling solves that problem, allowing us to make, and that's a finger quote, a better receiver with less parts more efficiently.
Right. And I assume the other problem, every time you add a stage like that, you're introducing its own noise and coupling and issues between the stages as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And now when we do it in math, now we can have multiple receivers. Don't care. Doesn't introduce any more noise product. It's just a horsepower thing. So this is why the Flex 6700 has 8 receivers. Could the new Flex 8600, which has a lot more horsepower, have more than 4? Not announcing anything. Yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of, time, it has to be written, because you can't just turn it on and test it. Is it worthwhile? As our CFO says, okay, if we allocate some money to this, how many do you have to sell before I make a profit on 8 more receivers?
Right.
Okay.
So, what's funny about that is I got my Flex in September, and a few weeks after I'm sitting here in the basement, and I literally have an old transistor radio here that I listen to the Cincinnati Reds on. And it all of a sudden dawned on me, I really have 2 receivers here, so I could put the Reds in the right channel and the CW stations that I'm chasing in the left channel and listen to both of them, and dang, it works. So I know that
and hence the reason you could have also been on 6 meters.
Yeah.
And listening to AM broadcast at the same time.
Yes, that's right. So, so the other thing that I kind of do and don't understand is you all have, I say y'all, there is a special sideband mode, enhanced sideband or something. Can you talk about that?
Oh, controlled envelope single sideband.
Bingo. Yep.
Yeah, I'd love to. Controlled envelope single sideband is an RF compressor. like an AF, like an audio frequency compressor, but it's an RF compressor. It was developed by Dave W9GR, and there is a great video where he explains it in detail on the Flex Radio YouTube channel. Easy to find. Or you can also Google or search online, just search for ARRL and CESSB, controlled envelope single sideband, and a QEX article comes up with far more information than I can understand.
Okay.
So Dave's video is really great about this, and essentially it gives you about 3 dB of more talk power by compressing the RF and getting it. We go through this iteration numerous times to not overdrive the radio. And you can sort of be said another way. Again, I'm going to pick on superhet radios because it's easy. The minute you overdrive a analog classic amplifier, it's designed to start limiting. You're actually doing yourself a favor by not driving the envelope, the sideband envelope, past 100%. Because the minute you push it past 100%, then the amplifier is obligated to start shutting down its power a little bit. And because we can do this in math, we can make sure we only get to 99.999%, and we're not flat topping and distorting. And this allows us to bring our average power up inside the envelope. And this is why you get more talk power. And it's called controlled envelope single sideband. So Dave wrote it. We enhanced it a bit. His code is available for free for other manufacturers to include it. Elecraft did it. Anon did it. And we did it. ICOM Kenwood Yesu, deaf ears. Maybe someday.
Yeah. So I noticed too in the Flex, or when I'm in the SDR software, and I'm drawing a blank. What's the SDR software called?
Smart SDR.
Smart SDR. Yeah, duh. There is an option up above. It says waveform. Okay, and one of the menu picks. Now, what is that exactly referring to?
Sure. I want to say one more thing on CESSB. What this gives you is double the power out. So your 100 watts behaves like 200. Your 1500 behaves like 3000. Okay, so 3 dB more. Okay, waveforms. Not hugely implemented yet, but let's say the ham radio industry came up with a whole new mode. And this is quite common, by the way, in the military side of the world. So we use sideband, RTTY type of thing, CW. CW is a waveform. But if we came out with a new one, you're not going to have to go out and buy a new radio. We'll just write software for it. So there is one waveform. It's, you know, as we often say, it's easy enough to do, but there's other higher priorities.
Yeah.
But doesn't prevent other people from writing them. Well, hopefully somebody will pick something up. But free DV, which you can find on Tapper's website, free digital voice. We had a waveform module. It's a plug-in piece of software that would work with that, so that you're actually transmitting. It's a data stream. It uses much smaller bandwidth, but it sounds like FM. D-Star, we broke that and never really got fixed, but you could plug a D-Star. Remember, if you wanted to use D-Star, you had to buy a dongle because that's how it was licensed, the ambient stuff. Plug it in the back of the radio and talk on HF and D-Star. Same thing, it gives you a new modulation scheme. The nice thing about free DV is there's a couple of cool modules out now that are on the Tapper site where you plug the dongle into the network finds the radio on the, because we tell the computer network where we are, and it pops up on my screen. I got sideband, CW, free DV, and I just flip to it, and I have talked to other people on the air in free DV. So
very cool.
So that's what waveforms are about. And yeah, hopefully we get more into it, or somebody else picks it up. Maybe some of the younger guys will get into it, type of thing. I don't think it's actually that hard if you're a programmer, but it's a chicken and egg thing. So
yeah,
it's like FT8, remember?
Yeah, but it does highlight the fact that in a software world, you can have this ability to craft these new things that we don't even know about yet, and basically plug them into the environment you already have for the most part and take advantage of it. Right. So you're
Yeah.
not getting hardware upgrades. You're not getting, yeah.
Can you imagine if you had to buy a new computer every time a new program came out?
No, I mean, it would be
No.
That's the same idea, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So on the whole same line, everything we're talking about here, when you were gracious enough to present to our club last week about a number of things, I was kind of trying to take some pictures and managing the group, and we were having internet connectivity, and you talked about the potential for having an FT8 environment that's spread out significantly more than just that the narrow, that we're working in now. So can you elaborate on that, please?
I'll do the best I can. This was driven by the DXpedition guys because FT8 is such a popular mode, and love it or hate it, it allows it's a real enabler. I'm going to talk about FT8 for a minute. For those people that have to maybe live on compromised antennas, they may not be heard on CW, and sideband is, in a contest, you really have to have a signal of some sort. But FT8's a bit of a leveler that way. They get on, they make contacts. Maybe they're shy, it doesn't matter. But hey, all of a sudden, I've taken my QMX radio here, and I've worked Germany on 15 meters on FT8. Never would have heard me on CW, but because we can work with a signal to noise. But all of that's jammed at 3 kilohertz. So if you see the grumpy mic, I'll say, well, you know what? The radio's got a dial for a reason. And it was me, by the way. I would like to think it was me and a couple other people start in early 6 meter days that came up with 50.323 for over, continent to continent QSOs. And we just started doing it. And eventually, it took like 4 years before it started to catch on. So FT8 wideband, or digital mode wideband, is going to allow DXpeditions to say, running my DXpedition, listening up 40. 40 wide. Okay, I can hear I can hear the noise. You're taking up more spectrum. Well, that's a whole other discussion, but heck, why not if that's where 80% of the operators are?
Yeah.
By doing some software magic and spoofing, at least on the DXpedition end, they can now listen to a 40 kilohertz spectrum of people calling them on FT8 and calling them back, and maybe calling multiple ones back within a 3 kilohertz spacing. And then, as Steve describes it, on the operator end, you and I, we could be able to do the same thing, but we'd sort of, there's some magic that has to happen to leverage that as well. Right now, you would only listen to 3. Well, you actually can listen to 10 kilohertz wide, because we can open up our receiver to 10 KC wide. I know you've seen that. Whether or not the sound card or the software or WSJT or JTX can handle 10 kilohertz of audio coming in. I don't know. I've never tried, but
yeah,
we got it. We have to do more in that. We just can't let it go. You just can't stay with the status quo. And so that's the slide that showed the 40 kilohertz wide receiver. That's not really a big stretch, because we already have that much receiver bandwidth in what's called a specialized radio stream called an IQ stream. Mm-hmm. And if you're a contester and you've used a skimmer, the skimmers use the IQ streams for decoding RTTY or CW to generate spots.
And I can see people hearing part of this and raising their eye like,
oh yeah.
But if you've ever listened to us, I've heard sideband pile-ups where they might be at 14.2 listening up 75. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, you're taking up,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
So is Michael, is Flex developing this FT8 system, or Joe Taylor, or who's really doing that?
We're hoping the Joe Taylors of the world will sort of get involved with it. We're gonna try to give them if we build it, they will come sort of thing, and it might take a while. But I wish Steve was here, because he could probably talk a bit more about it. I know he's been spearheading that. And waveforms were his idea. The waveform thing, by the way, got us our commercial business.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I really wasn't sure that was appropriate, but I was curious because I know there's some government activity y'all do, and I didn't know if this was a ham company that evolved out of government contracts or a, a ham company that had products that then could be tailored. And we may or may
Yeah,
not want to talk about it, and that's fine. I was just
that's okay. Yeah, the company started on a kitchen table by Gerald Youngblood, and
really,
there's a
Yeah.
cool video called "The Accidental Company," and he takes to digress a minute. He has this idea, and he's worked on it. He takes it to a club meeting, and he says, "Hey, what do you think?" And they all went, their jaws dropped. And then, well, how many people want one if I build some? And I forgot how many he sold. He was like planning to sell 100 in his first year and sold a lot more. I can't remember if it was 500 or 1,200 or something. And
Because I was the door prize chairman for W4DXCC in my memory, and I was going to ask you about this, but the guy, his name was Gerald. And,
that's
and,
him.
and I thought he was the owner, but then you mentioned the present owner, so I was confused until you just brought that up. So
Yeah, Gerald's company, and then he's recently retired a few years ago, and his son has taken over the company. That's Matt Youngblood.
yeah, okay, interesting.
And
yeah.
Gerald's still around, still like he's still in the office every day.
Oh, really?
Still, we've got a problem going on right now, and he's the one it's a mechanical problem. And I'm going to be cautious saying this. I don't want to say it because I don't want anybody to get excited if they're listening to this a year from now. That's sort of
Right.
when it's dated.
Yeah,
And right now it's February of 2025. We'll have it solved by tomorrow or the day after. But he's the guy. Okay, you got to find out the root cause of the problem, and
sure.
it's
So he's
mechanical
still
issue.
involved.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, he was at the Hamfest with us in Orlando 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
okay.
So I'm curious because I know that K9CT,
Yeah.
and
Craig,
I want
yeah,
to say there's a club in the Cape Verdes or Comoros or somewhere. Was it maybe D4 or D6?
D4C.
There you go. And both of those have taken these amazing, I mean, absolutely state-of-the-art shacks and have said, well, we want to put flex in here and just be done with it. And I believe that now, were you involved in either one of those? And how much fun was that?
Not personally. Craig on his own. He was around before I joined,
Okay.
and he's one of the people who have an Accord group that provides guidance. The D4C guys came in when I was here. They just took it, and even through COVID, they exploited remote operating and stuff, and they love it now because getting they're all Italian. Getting from Italy to the Cape Verde Islands is not a trivial flight.
Yeah.
So now, as we're seeing too with big contest stations, and we're getting older, they still now stay big, but you don't have to get and drive for 6 hours, and then contest ends at 8 and drive home. They just, their whole shack's set up, ready to go. My whole contest station's 2 hour drive away right now, surrounded by 3 feet of snow.
Wow. And I know, Joe, you're very good friends with K9CT. I know
Oh
that.
yeah, I've been on 4D expeditions with him, and two of them we co-leadered. And yeah, I really like Craig. One sharp guy.
Yeah, really good
You
guy.
probably tell more stories about Craig in the early days as well, but last I talked to him, he'd bought the property next door and he was making it bigger.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
He's gotten into moon
Amazing guy.
mounts, right?
I'm sorry.
He's gotten into moon mounts, right?
Yes. Yeah. He's into everything.
I've
And
kidded.
most of his towers are at least 150, 200 feet big. He's got 11
Yeah.
towers.
He's retired with a budget.
Yeah. A big budget.
I've kidded for years that
Yeah.
as a door prize for the Southwest Ohio DX dinner during Hamfest, we had to give away a seat during a major competition in his contest shack. I think that would be an absolute hoot. I
Yeah.
think that would be crazy.
Float the question. You might be surprised at the answer.
Yes.
Yeah, I may do that. You said, do not let me forget to talk about long-term service.
So long term, this is an email I got today. It's not uncommon for a person to email us and say, "Look, I'm going to buy my buddies, or I found us, or 6,500 as an example, or 6,300." You often get, "Can you tell me any history? What do you think it's worth? And am I stupid for buying it?" And so answer I often give is I've got an idea in my head what they're all worth used, but it depends what sort of deal you can work out. Just like a used car.
Sure.
The Flex 6300, 6500, 6700 are all that and the 6400 and the 6600 are all end of life, meaning we're not building anymore. But we also know, we think like you guys that, it's not, we didn't forget that we need to repair these for a while. And in some cases, we need to legally be able to repair them for a while. And so we really keep an eye on parts. We're sitting on millions of dollars of spare parts for exactly this sort of thing. And I forgot what it's called, but buyers will be yelling the answer at me. But there's always a last chance to buy. Imagine running out of 2N222s, which was the cockroach of transistors, right?
Right.
And being able to go buy. So we will, our buyer, Paul, will get these emails. He's pretty good about paying attention to them. And he goes like, well, I got to go buy like 400 of this or 500 of that. And so we will, on best effort, and that sounds really sort of casual, but it isn't. And it truly means best effort, try to fix stuff. We have a boneyard of radios too, where we've brought them in on trade and we've just kept the radio. There's nothing wrong with it, but we decided to boneyard it for parts just in case. So we're trying, and I think every amateur manufacturer does that. I can think of one issue with the Yaesu, the FT857, which was pretty popular, Swiss Army knife mobile radio, right? HF through to VHF. But this display is all zebraed. If you left it out in the sun, there's lines across them. And eventually it got to the point where they ran out of displays. But that's it's not going to happen tomorrow or next week. And we might easily make it 10 more years without an issue. And I think we do better than other industries by a whole lot. Okay. Pick I don't know, refrigerator or something, unless you find, Joe, the refrigerator guy who's got a shed full of, because he knows and I have that guy here in Toronto. He's our age.
Really?
He comes in, he and I have a great chat, and he starts explaining that, he goes, the start capacitor's failing. He looks at me, this was the first visit. Yeah, he goes, I might have one in the basement.
Yeah.
Because it turns out it was the same one as a high gain rotator.
Yeah.
Says, how much do I have to charge you for the part anyway? Yeah. But so that's the whole point about support. We take it seriously, right? We hate to say, hey, your radio dead. You got to buy a new one. And it's not that doesn't happen. Certainly with EMP events or a lightning hit is always a good one. It's I honestly think we spend too much time trying to recover a lightning hit radio because but there's always that concern, are we ever going to get it back to factory perfect?
Right.
Versus just sort of working.
And is it the case like with that kind of a radio where you may fix the obvious, but there's other components, for lack of a better term, let's say they're weak, and 6 months from now it's going to fail again?
Yeah.
That's not impossible, but if you've ever been in a car accident and you think it's fixed and then a new rattle shows up.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So you and I get into an elevator and I say, oh, I see there you're a ham radio guy and you work for Flex, and I have, Joe Schmuckatelli brand radio. What's your elevator? We're going up 10 floors here. Why would I look at Flex over another brand? Without being negative toward another brand, what is it about Flex that I want to look at?
You must be a hiring manager.
Yeah, he does hire.
I hired a lot of people. I had some great elevator questions. But,
okay. All right.
So my elevator pitch to you is, okay, Bill, you've been a ham for a long time. Did you like ICOM?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have an ICOM 756 Pro?
No, I didn't, but that's okay.
Did you have a Pro? Okay, well, let me do Joe. And then you bought a Pro 2, and then you brought a Pro 3, and you probably paid full price each time. Well, those days are gone.
Yeah.
You sold the first one for a loss, you sold the second one for a loss, and you paid full price for each time. And the point being, of course, with a software-defined radio, as long as the hardware foundation is solid, all we have to do is write software to give you the latest, greatest toys and tools. I mentioned Ken VA3SK. He's still using my 6300 every day for contesting, and I bought that in 2012.
Wow.
Really?
I can't think of any other HF radio I have done that with, other than, some people will say, well, I've had my radio for 20 years, but if you're a latest greatest sort of guy,
Yeah.
that's the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
109, it used to be $199 to upgrade from major versions. It's probably not going to be $199 anymore, just because it needs to be more, but it's still going to be a lot cheaper than selling and buying a new radio.
Right. Right. So I have my 6,000. Why do I want to go to the 8,000 series?
That's a good question. Are you a gotta have the latest greatest guy?
No, but I'm smart enough to know that there are features in a new environment that would make what I'm currently doing now either easier or quicker or more effective. So I'm not, it doesn't escape me that there might be a better way to do it.
Yep. So right away you're going to get a new radio with a new warranty, which you can extend to 4 years for a nominal fee. You're going to get adaptive pre-distortion. I know it works. I've used it. I have a demo of it. I think I showed it to you guys, or tried to show it to you guys last week.
Yeah.
It goes online, saw it wonderfully. And so that's a new feature. Most, who's got that right now? A non icon with the 7610, and it will be us. And I'm talking, I'd like to think weeks, but it'll probably be a couple of months. 95% functions, but you can't send it out like that because
Right.
everybody be complaining, especially in the social media world. Everybody complaining, oh, it's broken, and you don't want to defer sales. So,
Sure.
but I have some demos about that. You're going to hear a little bit quieter radio. It boots faster, but then if you never turn it off, like me, who cares? I'm pretty honest about that stuff. And then there will be new features that will only run on that radio. So does that mean you need it today? No, you can wait a week, a month, year. We're not going to put them on sale for a while, but we have a back order list of people, and sort of, if you've ever worked in marketing, you understand that nightmare that I can't put it on sale if I haven't shipped everybody their toy yet, because everybody hasn't got it. It's going to want the deal.
Yeah.
It cost me.
So you made a comment about, I think, smart SDR and analog meters, and that I kind of heard that like, wait a minute, what did he say?
For some reason, hams like analog meters. And hang on a sec.
Sure.
I didn't mean to take that ice cube into my mouth and talk right away. We've had a long time request for analog meters. People like watching that, okay, we got an incredibly accurate radio here. And by the way, when you get your radio or play with it, anything, if it's got a number produced with it, it's calibrated. So if your noise floor is 121 dB, it's 120 minus 121 dB. If that signal says it's, 70 minus 79 or S9, it's minus 79. And yet you want an analog meter. But I guess people like seeing the meters jump around, and it's more visual. We have bar graphs that jump around, but they still want to see the classic analog leader. So those are coming out in 3.9. We were actually testing it today. There's now, when you have 10 or 12 people involved, it's like, how should the ballistics look? And it's not like it, should it mimic exactly what we have, or, when we saw a typical VU meter? And it takes time to do this, because I think the world believes, heck, somebody already wrote the code for this. Can't you just like port it in? And no, you can't.
No.
Because it's their code. And if you, I don't understand the open source world well enough yet, but as I believe it, if you can incorporate it in your radio, but if you do, you then have to make those changes public.
Correct.
And we're greedy. We don't want to share our intellectual property. We did that with Power SDR. It was the right thing at the time, but there's no intentions of doing that again, because from a marketing greedy perspective, other vendors are building radios that work with Power SDR, and yet they don't have to pay anything for licensing to use the product. So it's a intellectual property thing. So, and this is why adaptive pre-distortion has taken longer. We had to write it from scratch. We had to, find a couple of really smart people to help, who really know their math, and we've got some really good math people.
You want to take a second and talk about exactly what that is? I mean, not in a second, but
Adaptive predistortion.
yes, I should have brought that up earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So adaptive predistortion is a transmit feature. And if you've ever watched HF is a good example. You've seen radio signals, sideband signals, where it's just on a waterfall. It looks like a nice, clean waterfall coming straight down, and the sides are nicely vertical, and there's no fingers coming off of the side. And those fingers are splatter. And we've all heard splatter. And we all know that splatter is bad. So adaptive predistortion essentially gets rid of the splatter and eliminates any mixing products that take us beyond our RF envelope. Oh, and even in the RF envelope, if you were to mix two low audio frequencies, remember mixing again? We're back to that old mixing problem. If the bad part of that mixing shows up, or actually at voice, those harmonics show up in the envelope and we don't want them, they get transmitted, type of thing. So adaptive predistortion fixes this by coming up with an equalizer. It's an audio equalizer in the radio, dynamically, ongoing as we speak, correcting. There's adaptive and static. Static does a one-time, sort of looks good all the time, good enough, and never changes it again. So we do adaptive, which is the harder one. And that had to be written from scratch.
Wow.
And that'll run on your 8000.
Okay. So this is a tough question because I really don't want to know if I'm not into vaporware and futures, and I certainly don't want any company secrets, but what does Michael Walker see in the next couple of years, something that we haven't even really thought about yet? I mean, you're the kind of guy I know that sits there and thinks, wouldn't it be cool?
Yeah.
So where do you think, and even if it's not Flex, let's just say ham radio in general. I mean, Flex seems like the kind of company, as does ICOM, to be honest with you, that says, you know what, there's all this AI stuff out there, for instance. There ought to be a way to really integrate that in and make much more powerful use than what we're doing now. I don't even know what that is. I mean, I could see maybe a contesting environment where but do you see something looking over the horizon that this gets me excited because I could see us going in this direction?
If I had a team with a $5 million budget, I would be working on noise mitigation for the urban operator. And we're sort of hacking away at it, we amateurs. But if you live in the city, HF is really hard to do. And this is what's driving remote operations, because people are building remote stations. That's just one of the reasons. There's many reasons why you want to build a version of a remote where it's, you have to get in the car to go to the transmitter, sort of thing. And I think there's more going to come in noise mitigation. The ability to drop down my background noise and hear those weaker signals. There is already an online product for free called RM Noise. You can, RM being the Linux term for, delete,
right,
or remove. RM Noise, and it integrates beautifully to a Flex radio because of the way we have that digital audio exchange connector, and it essentially samples noise and removes it. It ORs it out, right? It's a math thing. So I would love to see us do more in that, because I want to see it in our product, and I'm not pre-announcing anything, but anything in that area would be a win for every amateur operator to get the noise spectrum down. And it's been bad for 15 or 20 years. I think the first time I remember noise environments is I was president of a big FM group called the Toronto FM Communication Society. And I remember being able to talk across Toronto on 5.2, mobile to mobile, because the noise floor was low. And we were poking around in the eastern part of Toronto called Scarborough, and I was trying to call my buddy, Paul, and he wasn't that far away. He was maybe 10 miles away, and we had, a reasonably good mobile setup, had a typical 2-meter antenna, 25 watt, 45 watt radio. Not that there's a big difference between 25 and 45 watts. And I couldn't hear him. He couldn't hear me. And I looked down, and like the S meter on FM was sitting around S5.
Yeah.
And then I get up into Northern Ontario, and there was an aha moment where I'm from, and my, same buddy Ken and we're like 40 miles away on 5.2, and we're hilltopping it a little bit just for fun. And he's S8, S9, as you know, he's just, but I can hear him down to S0.
Wow.
And I think that's where we're cleaning up the transmitters, the royal we, but now I need to, there's no excuse now not to have the horsepower, the computer program, the algorithms, the AI work on the noise built into the radio. Better noise blankers, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all the D expeditions go out, they all complain about noise. They go to these little islands. So it looks to me like that would be very, very, very beneficial.
For them, yeah, if they have noise issues from generators, but also for us, because the expeditions aren't very strong on a good day, and if they're sitting, if they're sitting like at S5, S6, and that's where your noise floor, it's really hard. But my remote might be sitting at S1, and I have no problem copying them.
Yeah.
Right.
And we've all been there, right? Going,
yeah.
How did he hear him? I don't even hear a thing. And is it me? Did antenna fall down? And get the idea. But sometimes it's just propagation as well.
If you eliminate the noise, there's nothing left but the signal.
Apparently.
Yeah. So Joe and I can come up with $350 towards your $5 million. So
yeah, what do you want us to donate?
Yeah, you want to do a GoFundMe?
Yeah, well, we don't have. Flex Radio doesn't have to do it, but you get the right bunch of guys together.
Yeah.
And I think, to be honest, you get the right bunch of guys together, and maybe they've already done it, and they've gone to ARDC, and there's some. There's money for projects, at least feasibility studies.
Yeah.
And I think, and that might already be happening, right? We may never know. And
sure.
They're not publishing yet.
So Joe and I are going to have a call in a week or so with Ned Stearns, AA7A. And Ned is one of the off-scale brilliant guys, and we'll ask him if there's anything cooking in this environment, and would he like to pledge $1 million towards your project? Let's see what we can come up with.
I used to ask. It used to take about $1 million to design a radio. I think now it's up to 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you come up with a new HF rig, it's you better set aside $2.5 to $3 million, and you can burn through that pretty quickly, just in salary.
Yeah.
So, Michael, for all of our listeners, when do you suspect Flex will come out with the next radio?
Good question.
You always have to look ahead.
Even if we were or not, I can't answer that. The life cycle of building new radio is so hard, and we've looked at radios such as a replacement to the Flex 1500, a nice little QRP radio. Those are still well sought after today. You still pay full price today, even for a used one, or a VHF UHF type radio. They're always on the table. Pretty much every let's comes the napkins, and then the finance guy gets involved and goes, okay, so what's the competition? Okay, we're going to do a desktop VHF UHF radio like the ICOM 9700. Okay, so that sells, what does that sell for now? 1700 US, right? 1800. All right, how fast can you build it? What's the how many are you going to sell, and at what price?
Yep.
And then those are the hard questions. So
sure. So the last thing on my list, and I've done a little research on this, but there's a lot of transverters and external accessories for the Flex. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the radio has an open application programming interface, or you can communicate with it. So simply put, for our programmer types or our hacker types or our Node-RED people, you can connect to the radio. And Steve did this. Steve talks about this in 5AC. He had was it a Kenwood 742 or 741 or 732? It was a nice little mobile, but he hated the fact he couldn't do anything with it other than plug it in, turn it on, and use it, and set a frequency in memory and scan. And so when he started with Flex decades ago, he wanted to have the ability for people to come up with their own widgets. And there's probably hundreds of widgets that will now work with our radio. Some of the more popular ones are, we do like our buttons. No matter what you say, you like your buttons. But if you've not seen a Stream Deck, which is a little panel, I'm looking at one now with 12 buttons on it. You can configure that and say, hey, I have my Stream Deck is set up so antenna 1, antenna, like receiving antennas 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top. Because in a contest, I like to flip to the beverage antenna and back in a hurry, type of thing. And so the Stream Deck is an example. For our digital operators, getting digital running with Slice Master or multiple versions of copies of FT8 at the same time is now just a mouse click. And this open API has allowed people to communicate directly to the radio and say, hey, what slice is active, what frequency it's on, what are the power settings? And it's like cat control on steroids. Except now, rather than using a very archaic USB cable method or RS-232 method, which is a peer-to-peer, meaning one person to one person, it's on the computer network. So we can have, it's in fact, I do it all the time, but I can have my Maestro connected to the radio or my Windows computer running Smart SDR connected to the radio like normal. But what if I want to run my logging program on my laptop at the same time? No problem. What if I want WSJT on a totally different computer at the same time? I can use all three simultaneously. Not that you need to, but it gives a lot more flexibility, and maybe that's why we're called Flex Radio, to be able to do that integration. And say you wanted to, there's no client for Linux. There's no client for Android. There's no Chromebook client. But with a bit of work and a smart program, or heck, maybe, and a bit of chat GPT work, you could probably start to write your own client pretty fast. Even if you weren't a programmer, maybe you're a retired wannabe programmer. So you sit down, and if you know how to, and a lot of these programs that are available that communicate with the radio or logging programs or whatever, you do this by now, connecting to the radio over the LAN rather than having to build cables for integration. One of the fears all of us ever had was, I'm an Icon person. I really like the way that new Kenwood comes out, and I get it, and I'm going to have to build all new cables for it. The problem goes away when it's all Ethernet based or TCP based, and it's easy. It's just you mentioned transverters. If you look over my shoulder, see if I get this right because it's backwards here.
Right.
There's two transfers. There's a Flex 60 600M up here. That's for the displays and standby. And these two, it's a VHF transverter, UHF transverter from Q5 signals. And over here, it's not on, is a 5-band one, which happens to be on 1296. Sort of a bit of overkill. But the integration to transverters is so well designed. And if you're a satellite operator, it's so cool to be on a satellite. And I do a lot of satellite here in the city because the noise problem isn't the same. And yet I can see my downlink signal. I can see other people in the pass band, just the wealth of visual information. And I'm sure, Bill, you don't want to go back to something where you can't see the spectrum.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, I'm a bigot. I tried to do a contest on an analog radio one day. It was driving me nuts. Just,
the funny thing for me was I went from an FT950, which I loved, but that was an older radio. So I go from that to this Flex. Well, I'd never used a waterfall on any radio, right? It didn't matter whose it was. So for me, it's like, oh, this is better than canned beer. This is cool stuff. And then when you start adding the tracking fit, and I know a lot of the vendors have a lot of the same stuff, but this was my first introduction to it. So as much as I love the FT950, it didn't take a whole lot of time to leave it behind. So I've been. What was your first?
Let me ask you a question. What was your first aha moment with the radio?
This could sound silly. No? When I lifted it out of the box and it weighed 10 or 12 pounds, whatever it weighed.
Yeah, it weighs 14 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was. I mean, I hope that's not too silly, but I'm ready to lug this thing out, and it's like, oh, look at that. There's nothing to it. And I didn't open it because I'm always worried about warranties, but I'm like, come on, there's nothing in here. This thing just so that was
It's full of air.
is that a typical aha moment, or
No, that's not an uncommon one. Do you have a next aha moment from an
um,
operational perspective?
probably the smart SDR? Just for
Yeah.
me, I guess the third aha moment would have been two receivers. That was like, this is cool. And again, I know a lot of radios had that. I had not experienced that. So for me, it was, this is pretty cool.
I tell it this way. So a lot of receivers at radios have two receivers, but it's always a main and a sub receiver. And
Right.
a sub receivers, I've used radios with sub receivers like the FT1000MP, which is a beautiful radio, or the D rather, FT1000D with the second receiver. But you really couldn't do anything with it. And if you did SO2R, you still needed a second radio, which is not the case with ours. You can run full SO2R. Our radios have main receivers, either 2 or 4, or in the case of the 6700, 8, and we share the transmitter. So as you know, if I'm on 20 meters and doing something here in FT8 and I'm decoding 20 and 15 at the same time, heck, oh, look at that FT8 new country. I just go click and it works. Especially if you're integrating grid tracker type of thing. And so that's one of the cooler advantages I see. And well, what do I need more than 8 slices for? And well, some guys do, but why do you need more than 2 towers? It's type of thing. And I think one of the bigger advantages too is a typical operator might have a multi-band antenna, like an HF6V type of thing, vertical. I'm not an end-fed half-wave fan for a variety of reasons, but and a hunk of coax and one amplifier, and or no amplifier, and our radio, and he's simultaneously then on all bands. It's a beautiful, simple station. You want to run SO2R with simulate a 6600, you can do it, and you don't have to double up everything. Joe, for you in 6 meters, do you ever get to the point where, okay, so I'm on 50.313 and 323 might be starting to open, but now I got to give up 313. What am I going to miss?
Yes. Yes.
Well, you don't have to with us. You can do both at the same time.
Yeah.
So
what's the packet cluster for that?
So
I know, but that's only part of the story.
Yeah.
What it forced me to do was either a contest or chasing DX was I have a Meritron AL80B. And for me to jump from 40 to 10, the radio's fine. But if I want to use the amplifier on both, it's like, okay, I have to stop. I have to tune it. And on one hand, that's not a big deal. I'll be the first to admit it.
It's a huge deal. I get it. I 100% get it. So do I call them? Do I go to standby and call them in barefoot power? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why all of a sudden it's like, well, one of the guys in the club got this Mercury 3S from KM3KM. That's what, and it's basically it tunes as soon as it senses RF. And I moved to that. And this is a whole new game now. It's like, holy smokes. I can go from, even this weekend in the CW contest, I can go from, 10 to 20 meters by switching the receivers, and the amplifier quote follows, because as soon as you key up, it's there. So yeah, it's just cool stuff.
The RF sensing in those radios, even the Power Genius XL, is phenomenal. I mean, they do it in cycles of RF, right? Long before it gets to full power. You don't have to worry about it. It's well done technology. When the PGXL, the Power Genius XL, which is the sister amp, is like that as well. Lux is a great amp. I have to admit, it looks really cool. I don't see my amplifier, so I don't care, but it does look cool. I have an RF kit one sitting over my shoulder here. It's sort of my backup when I bought it when they first came out, long before I worked for Flex Radio. So it's only collecting dust because I don't do 6 meters in the city anymore. I took that antenna down. There's just too many other guys around me. I just gave up and moved everything to the other grid square. So
yeah. Well, Joe, did I forget anything?
No, this has been absolutely excellent. I love it. You did a great job, Michael.
Michael,
can I give a sales plug?
Sure.
So we do something a little different. If you're ever thinking of getting a radio, give us a call, drop us an email, whatever. It's the obvious, sales at flexradio.com. We dressed it up and said hams at flexradio.com so we're around. But I think we're the only people that do this. Joe, say you decide one day you're going to try a site. You're going to spend, the kids' inheritance. You're going to buy a new radio. And by the way, it's not a $5,000 bill. It starts about 2,600. If you buy it from us, you get 30 days. You don't like it, send it back. We'll give you your money back. You just got to ship it to us. So for the cost of a bit of shipping, I don't know if anybody else does that. We don't generally charge restocking. I reserve that because there's always an exception. And but I think we get back 2 or 3 a year, either for a variety of reasons that, it just didn't work for me. That's okay. What didn't you like? Okay, I'll pass that on. Never. I have a guy today who's we're a little delayed in shipping his radio, and I phoned him. I said, "Hey, I just want to talk to you, but I'm gonna, we'll refund your order. It's okay. It's no big deal. I just want to know what you're thinking." And the company, these are a great bunch of people to work for. It's until you meet them, and Bill, you've met a couple of them, I'm sure, and they all work their butts off. They dedicated. I sort of wish I lived in Austin because I would love to hang out with them a bit more. We're really good at hiring really smart people. We've picked up some geniuses absolutely right out of university. A couple of, and they're all good too. So, great senses of humor. And I love being here. It's like, I should retire, but then what I'm going to do? And then I would miss all this fun.
That's right. So Joe, maybe we could volunteer for booth duty and you could get a real feel for the radios.
Yeah. Well,
Joe, you come down next event. Are you in Dayton? Where are you? You're not in Dayton.
Yeah, we're outside of Dayton. Yeah.
So come down to Dayton. Sit down at the table. We'll have a couple of maestros on the air. We'll put some headphones on you, and you dial around and have a listen. And the one thing that people tell me all the time is when I did what you told me about the gain, the RF gain, it's called AGCT. The radio sounds way too quiet. Like, it's like you've turned the RF gain. They feel they've turned the RF gain too high, but I'm still hearing the weak signals without. No, and so that's the genius of the receiver.
Well, very cool. I'll bring him over because we've got the DX dinner Friday night. If anybody needs tickets, they can contact me. And then we have the DX forum on Saturday. And you guys last year were in the building adjacent to where the forums were. So I'll grab him by the collar and bring him over, and we'll sit there.
Bill, I do have a video. It's called "How to Get My Buddy to Use My Radio Remotely."
Okay.
Thanks to SmartLink, because all he has to do is install Smart SDR and connect to your radio once you set it up. And it's about as complicated as setting up Gmail. And it doesn't require, you don't have to be a network guru to do it. We're the only radio that does it this way. And it's a low latency peer-to-peer connection. And Bill, you'll understand this. We host everybody's, we don't host. We have a lookup table on AWS, and say if Joe wants to connect to your radio, it does its little magic and it says, "Oh, Bill's radio's at his WAN address, this IP address. These are the 2 ports to use," and you're connected. Rather than having to do the whole, port forward 9 DNS, static IP, etc. Very simple.
It is very simple. Yeah, I'll bring him over.
Yeah.
Well, worst case, Michael, maybe we can get him a Flex hat.
I'll get him a hat, but he's got to give me his ICOM one.
Well, I don't know.
You know how that goes.
Yeah.
All right, Michael. Any other thing you'd like to mention?
No, I said other than get on the air, make some contacts, do something.
Yeah.
And then mentor. We all got here one way or another because people helped us. So if there are younger than us, which is not very young, or younger, get them on the air somehow.
Yeah.
And help them out. Don't forget, a lot of us have probably forgotten our Elmers, or, the club that Elmered us and put up with us and allowed us to blow stuff up and helped us fix the blowing up stuff. That's all part of the life cycle.
Yeah.
So please help.
All right. Well, I know you're a busy guy, and we had to reschedule this once, and I apologize. And you've taken an hour and a half or so last week, and going on 2 hours this week, and I truly appreciate it. I really do. And you've been very professional, very knowledgeable, and yet I think we've had a lot of fun. So I'll say thanks again. If there's anything we can do to help you out here, let me know, and we'll just keep in touch and kind of keep things rolling.
Absolutely. And you know what? You just did. So thank you for having me
Yeah.
and tell the story. So
All right, buddy. And Joe, thanks again. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks again, Michael. Very interesting.
Yep.
7-3.
All right,
Uh-huh.
7-3.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you found that as interesting and entertaining as I did. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the DX Mentor. I would like to thank our sponsors, ICOM America, the Daily DX, DX Engineering, and the Southwest Ohio DX Association. You won't find anyone more committed to DX than these sponsors. I would also like to thank our guests today, Michael, VA3MW, and Joe, W8GEX. And of course, I really want to thank you, the listener and the viewer. Without you, there would really be no point to do this, so thank you. I would love to have your feedback, answer your questions, and provide help with any DX or amateur radio related issues that you may have. If you need clarification on something or you just have a question, email me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Please drop me a line if you have achieved an all-time new one, received recognition, or have a DX event that you would like us to mention. We would be happy to do that. If you know of another person who has reached a milestone or has an accomplishment, just send that along as well. We'll announce it. If you're enjoying the DX Mentor episodes, please hit the subscribe button. You can also click like if you found this one particularly interesting. And as I mentioned, another way to keep in touch and to find out what we're up to is to follow us on our Facebook page. The DX Mentor is the name. 7-3 for this episode. Thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. And I hope to hear you in the pile-up soon.